Good morning. It's great to be back with you all this morning. Well, there's a man in central Brazil who is in his mid-70s now with white hair and a white beard. He was born into a Catholic family, but soon became an atheist as a teenager and remained a teenager until the age of 21 in 1979, while fasting from food and water, brought to the brink of death and starvation. God spoke to this man in Brazil. So he claims. God spoke to him to tell him the astonishing news that he was, in fact, Jesus Christ. Yes, said the voice, the same Christ who was crucified. And told him, from now on you will roam upon the earth as a wandering pilgrim. And so he has. From 1979 until today, he has identified as Jesus, dressed in a white tunic, sandals, and wandered as a pilgrim across 27 countries in Latin America and Europe, announcing that the end of the world is at hand. Now older, he lives with a handful of his followers in a compound in central Brazil, which he now calls the New Jerusalem. He's about one of a dozen men on earth right now who claim to be Jesus Christ. Hence, in this series, we're trying to answer that question, well, who is the real Jesus, right? Give us the real Jesus. It's an important question because Jesus fakes are all around us, right? And before we simply laugh them off as lunatics, we're reminded of Jesus' own words, the real Jesus who warned us that many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. Okay, so we don't need to be weirded out by this. This is a phenomenon that Jesus prepared us for. So get used to false Jesuses and get used to their zealous followers, right? Because they're going to be marching through your neighborhood 2 by 2. I guarantee it. Here are just a few fake Jesuses that we see today. There's the Mormon Jesus. They say Jesus was a spirit, right? Jesus was a spirit who later manifested himself in the flesh. And as a man, he aspired to reach godhood. He aspired to become a god after the resurrection, and he did it. And so can we. We can do that too. We were eternal spirits before we were born, and now we're in the flesh, and now we're striving, we're reaching towards divinity. We want to be gods too. Jesus did it, we can do it if we try hard enough. So say the Mormons. There's a Jehovah's Witness Jesus. They say Jesus was not a mere man or a good teacher. Jesus was an angel. Jesus was the archangel, Michael, God's very first creation, super powerful, but not God, they say. Jesus is just the greatest and most powerful creature that God ever made. It's Jesus of Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a Muslim Jesus, of course. They say Jesus was a great teacher. He was a prophet. He was one of the best teachers to ever live. But he was certainly not God. He didn't die on the cross. He wasn't resurrected. We don't need any of that. He's just a great teacher. So listen to him. Listen to what he says as a teacher. That's the Jesus of Islam. There's a Jesus of the theological liberal variety today, right? They say Jesus was a great teacher. Yes, we should listen to him. Everything he did was for us to see a moral model. Why did Jesus die on the cross? Well, he wants us to see what it means to self-sacrifice. Follow his model. Do what he did. He's a moral model for us to follow. And we measure up by doing what he did, by following his model. There's a Jesus of ancient pagan variety as well. Ancient pagans said, sure, if you want to worship Christ, do it, right? It's better to have the gods on your side than to have the gods against you. You don't want the gods against you, right? So worship Jesus. It's better to be safe than sorry. If you want your life to be comfortable, you want the seas to be calm, you want your kids to be healthy, you want your crops to be full, do what the gods say. You scratch their back, they'll take care of you, right? So go to church, store up favor points so that you can cash those in later when you're in a bind. A lot of people have that conception of who Jesus is. And related to that, we have the prosperity gospel Jesus. The prosperity gospel Jesus, right? On cable TV Jesus. Jesus came to make his followers healthy and to make them wealthy. And if you have enough faith in him, that's what Christ can give you. Whatever you ask, you'll get it if you have enough faith. Jesus is our genie, and he's out to make our lives comfortable and lavish if we have enough faith. But in this crowd of contemporary fakes, we meet the real Jesus in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. Turn there this morning in Mark chapter 4. We're going on a theology cruise with the real Jesus. That's what I'm calling this sermon, a theology cruise with the real Jesus. In this text in Mark chapter 4, Jesus is going to separate himself from all the phonies that I just mentioned. Even the phonies entertained by the disciples. We're going to find out that disciples don't quite know who this real Jesus is. So it's time to clear out the fakes. Time to clear out the fake Jesuses. And that's what Jesus is going to do in Mark chapter 4. What we're going to study comes at the very end of an amazing day in Mark chapter 4. The earlier part of the chapter, on the shoreline, Jesus is teaching a crowd of people standing in the boat. So there's so many people pressing him towards the water. He gets into a boat, and he stands there, and he teaches all day. He delivers parable after parable after parable to these people. And then when he takes breaks, what he does is he pulls his inner circle disciples close to the boat, and he says, let me explain to you what I just meant by that parable. Okay? So this is before the ESV study Bible, all right? There weren't study Bibles back then, and Jesus is giving parable after parable, and then in the breaks, he calls his disciples, his inner circle forward, and says, let me explain that parable to you. He's giving them like the footnote answers in the ESV study Bible, right? And so it's an amazing day for his followers. It's an amazing day of teaching famous parables all throughout Mark chapter 4 that you see. Christ is tired. He's exhausted. This has been a long day. And the disciples are tired as well. But verse 35, here's what we read. On that day, after a long day of teaching, when evening had come, he, Jesus, said to them, let's go across to the other side of the lake. This is a boat ride for the ages. And Jesus initiates it. He initiates it. It's his idea. It's a theology cruise. Have you ever been on a cruise where there's Bible teachers and it's like a conference on water? That's what Jesus has got going on here, okay? He has been teaching all day, but his teaching is not done. It's not done. He's got a late night lesson for his followers, a theology conference on water. And it's almost as if Jesus invites all the world's religions on board as well. All the fake and phony Jesuses, all the Jesuses that the disciples entertain, just bring them on board. Bring them on board. Because Jesus is about to make very clear who he is. Verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. So all day by the sea, Jesus taught parables, and that evening he gets into a boat to go across the Sea of Galilee, and he does so with several boats. Okay, so it's not just one boat, there's several boats in this cruise, and it's not just the disciples. These are 30-foot long fishing vessels. These are big boats. These are not canoes. And at Jesus' request again, they embark into a dangerous journey into the open sea at night. Okay? Storms on the Sea of Galilee were no joke. They were common. They were dangerous. Most of the disciples were fishermen. They knew that. They knew the challenges of what could meet them out on the sea. And Jesus knows the risk. In fact, when Christ puts his foot onto the boat of that vessel to go across the sea, he knows there's going to be a storm. He knows it. And instead of waiting out the storm on shore, he tells the disciples to sail right into it. How does Jesus know this? That is the question we're going to answer a little bit later. Just know that he knows. Jesus knows there's a storm coming. And then wham, it hits, verse 37, and a mega windstorm arose. A great windstorm, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling with water. There's a trio of megas in this text. This is the first one. A mega windstorm hits. Something huge, shocking, terrible, an epic windstorm, turning the seas and filling the boat with water to the point of sinking. Violent, frightening. And Jesus is not surprised, and Jesus is not disturbed. Verse 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Jesus sleeps in the back of the boat on a pillow, maybe under a little roofed area. There might have been a little roofed area on the back of the boat. In any case, Jesus cannot drown. Okay? That's impossible. In future weeks, Pastor Jamie is going to lead us through the story of Jesus walking on water, which is amazing. It's an incredible miracle. But the fact is, Jesus is physically unsinkable. He can't drown. Okay? The unexplainable miracle that I can't figure out is how he got baptized. That's the miracle. I don't know how that worked. Jesus has no fear of the storms on the sea. He cannot drown. It's impossible. Verse 38b. And the disciples awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So unsinkable Jesus is snoring on, ignoring his friends. So they awaken him. They're like, hello, Jesus. This is a rude awakening. Literally, this is a rude awakening. They rudely awaken Christ with an interrogation. No one likes to wake up this way, right? Hello, sleepy. Don't mean to interrupt your nap time here, but we, your inner circle, your executive team, the disciples that sort of do things for you everywhere you go, we're about to die. Okay, it's not really a question; it's an interrogation. Notice here that they call him teacher, right? They call him rabbi. It's a loaded term. And this is the Jesus of billions of people on earth, right? He's just a teacher, just a man of wisdom, just a creative, intriguing man of words. But oh my, when you're about to die, you need more than a rabbi. And so that idea that Jesus is just a teacher needs to get thrown overboard. And it does in verse 39. And he, Jesus, awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." This rebuke is very brief. It is very blunt. Jesus stands up, he looks at the storm, and he says, "Be muzzled." It's literally what he says. In our vernacular, we would say, "Shut up. Shut up." Okay? Kids, you can't do that. This is Jesus. Jesus can speak to demons and to storms by saying, "Shut up." We can't say that. But Jesus can. He looks at the storm and he says, "Storm, shut up." That's all he says. The storm stops immediately. This is all Jesus needs to say in an exorcism that we saw in the first chapter of Mark. A demon comes heckling Jesus, says, "I know who you are, you're Jesus, the Son of..." Jesus says, "Shut up, leave this man." Just say, "Shut up." So there's a clear parallel here with how Jesus rebukes the sea and how he rebukes demons. And that doesn't entirely explain what's going on in the water, but there's definitely parallels here. So this is the Jesus that we worship. The God-man who controls storms. It's amazing. Too often we read the Gospels trying to parcel out two different Jesuses, right? I catch myself doing this as well, right? There's a Jesus being human, and there's a Jesus being God, and we read about Jesus who is hungry, so we say, "Oh, that's human Jesus over there being hungry," and then he stills the storm, and we're like, "Oh, that's God Jesus over here," right? And we got these two parceled out columns. Is this human Jesus or is this God Jesus? But when it comes to understanding who the real Jesus is, this text presses his humanity and his deity together like very few texts I know of in the Bible. Look at this again. He awoke and rebuked the storm. He awoke and he rebuked the storm. Sleepy man is sovereign God. Right? There's not two columns, right? It's not parceled out easily. There's not a Jesus, man Jesus and God Jesus. It's one. The phrase is so amazing. He awoke and rebuked. Human, God, all together. Verse 39, and the wind ceased. I love this. And there was a mega calm. A mega calm. And in a flash, the winds and the sea calm. This is a great calm. A mega windstorm becomes literally a mega calm. I love that. A calm so huge, a calm so shocking, a calm so terrible, a calm so epic. It is terrible. There's this a frightening calm. A mega calm happens. It's frightening. And a crate load of fake Jesuses just went overboard. And the disciples' chins are on the floor, and Jesus turns to them in verse 40, and he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? They're still trying to figure out who this guy is. Why such cowards, he says. Why are you such cowards? Jesus calmed the sea for cowards. Prosperity gospel of Jesus just got thrown overboard. Jesus calms the sea for cowards. Now the text doesn't say, but what should they have done instead? I've thought about this a lot for the past month. I've talked to Greg about this. I'm like, what were they supposed to do in the boat? Like, I'm trying to figure out what would have been faith? What would have faith look like in the boat? Were they just to pray to God as a group for deliverance and just let Jesus sleep? Or should they have awoken Christ more gently, more expectantly? I don't know. But their faith has failed and their fears go mega. Verse 41, and they were filled with mega fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obeys him? Who then is this? That's the question. That's the question. Jesus, the real Jesus, is still a stranger to his own followers. This is no mere teacher. But now the disciples are making these connections. This man, Jesus Christ, has authority and power over demons. He has power over sickness, over sin, even over death. This same Christ wields authority and power over the forces of nature. The disciples are scared to death of the storm, and the disciples are scared to death times 1,000 to be in the presence of God. The most real things in life are not physical dangers. Facing death is a reality that will change your life. It will. You try to fill your life with vanities for days and months and years, and then you go to a funeral, right? And you're just reminded, oh, death is real. Death is real. And that fight or flight feeling that we feel whenever we're faced with danger or faced with things that could challenge our lives, that fight or flight feeling is dwarfed by only one thing that is greater. It is dwarfed by standing in the presence of the living God. So do not fear the storm that can kill your body. Fear the one who has authority over those storms. Only God can command the wind and the seas, and this creator God is standing in the boat. Jesus is the God of Israel, fully God, not just a teacher, not some man aspiring to divinity. This man in the boat is the whole fullness of deity dwelling in bodily form. And they knew God was in their boat. They knew God was in their boat because these disciples knew the sailor's song of Psalm 107. Turn there briefly, Psalm 107. I want to look at this text as well, layer this on to what we just saw. The sailor's song is Psalm 107, verses 23 to 32. The Navy has turned this text into a hymn. I forget the name of it. Anybody remember what the Navy's hymn is for the sailors on the sea? It's a Trinitarian song. It's amazing. Anybody know the title? Nah, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But the Sailor Song is what I'm calling it here in Psalm 107. This story in Mark chapter 4 with the disciples is an almost literal enactment of Psalm 107. You can overlay these two stories and sort of let them interpret one another. It's really fascinating. Psalm 107, 23 to 32. It's a very rare mention, by the way, of God-fearing businessmen in the Bible. You don't find God-fearing businessmen mentioned very often in the Bible. We see them in Psalm 107 in this text. These are believers that we're going to see. They're not pagan unbelievers, not fishermen. These are traveling businessmen, men of God. These are the ancient version of the seasoned airline flyers today. These are the platinum gold medallion, super elite Sky Mile members, okay? These are the folks who know how to sail. They're on the seas a lot. These are the folks who can tell you what it's like to emergency land in a jet at night with one engine. Like, they've been there. They know what that's like. If you want to swap stories about turbulence. I mean, these are guys who have been in the air and have seen drink carts go airborne. I mean, they've got stories to tell. They've been there, done that. Seasoned men on a business trip, not on jets, but on the ancient equivalent of jets, on ships. Verse 23. Some, these God-fearing believers, went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. Businessmen at work, watching God work, okay? Businessmen at work, watching God work. Okay, so what deeds do they see from their window seats? In verse 25, for he, God, commanded and raised the stormy sea, which lifted up the waves of the sea. This is key. Storms on the sea don't just originate in nature or in chance or in karma or in devils or in demons. They are fundamentally the Creator's work. The violent sea obeys the orders of God. That's stunning. So in the beginning, God spoke and commanded creation into being. We read that in Psalm 33. God commands, he creates creation, and now God speaks and commands his creation. The same verb pairing for creation is applied in this verse. The creator of the ocean gets to command the ocean, okay? The creator of the ocean gets to command the ocean. That's what this text is telling us. And so it is God himself who commands the ocean under the boat. Amazing text. Verse 26, they, the businessmen, God-fearing businessmen, mounted up to heaven and they went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. Violent turbulence, up and down. They reeled, staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. So you have this vertical turbulence. These businessmen on the sea are going up and down like this. And now they're reeling in circles, okay? So they're going up and down and reeling in circles, staggering. To the vertical turbulence, we see that horizontal staggering up and down. Men stumble in circles with no answers. They're powerless in this situation. So what do? Verse 28. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Sound familiar? Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people and praise him in the assembly of the elders. This sailor song in Psalm 107 outlines into very simple points, 3 simple points. Number 1, God churns the sea to magnify his power in creation. God churns the sea to magnify his power in creation. God rebukes the waves to magnify his power in redemption. God rebukes the sea to magnify his power in redemption. and God magnifies himself to the world through the redeemed. God churns the sea to magnify his power in creation. God rebukes the waves to magnify his power in redemption. God magnifies himself to the world through the redeemed. See, Jesus was preparing his disciples for lifelong ministry of declaring the love and majesty of Jesus Christ to the world. There's so much more to say, but we need to wrap up this message on these two texts in Mark 4 and Psalm 107. Let me give you just two takeaways. Two things to really think about as you look at these two texts. Takeaway 1. Every water droplet always obeys Christ. Every water droplet always obeys Christ. It's rather fascinating that the disciples didn't say to Jesus, oh, he has the power to stop storms. He's a miracle worker. He can stop storms. That'd be cool. That's what a lot of Christians mean when they affirm that God is sovereign. Like, God is my goalie. Evil comes up, storms arise, and the first thing I do is grab a bucket to toss out the water and do whatever I can. And when I realize that I can't save myself, I need someone to deliver me, then I turn to God, and then he becomes my sovereign goalie. He's like my fail-safe. He's my insurance policy at the very end. He's my final fail-safe when my life capsizes. That's what God's sovereignty means to a lot of Christians. He's ready to employ his sovereign defense in the very last case. Jesus is my goalie. When everything else fails, he's going to be sovereign at the very end. But what Psalm 107 reminds us is that Jesus' sovereignty is not simply manifested when he tells a hurricane to shut up. It's manifested when he tells a hurricane to rise up. So the disciples are not merely amazed at his power to stop storms. That's amazing. They are more amazed that the wind and the seas obey him. In calm and peaceful days, they obey Christ. In monsoon seasons, they obey Christ. When flash floods hit, they obey Christ. When the Colorado River levels rise and drop, it's obeying Christ. When the sea is churned, the winds and the waves are obeying Christ. Psalm 107 sheds so much light on how profound Mark chapter 4 really is. It's why Jesus knew there was a storm coming and why he could sleep right through it. There's no surprise to him. Why not? Because he is God, meaning every water droplet always obeys Christ, even as he sleeps. Unbelievable. Takeaway number 2, kiss the wave. Kiss the wave. Mark 4 and Psalm 107 work together to blow up every false Jesus that I mentioned at the start, especially the ancient paganism Jesus and the prosperity gospel Jesus. I scratch your back, you scratch my back, right? Religion is a transaction with the deities. I'll put this idol in my house, I'll go to this temple, I'll obey the annual rituals, and then, gods, you will make my life better. I'll have smooth sailing, healthy kids, my crops will grow full. That's the deal, right? Or to make this more contemporary, God, I'll go to church every week or most weeks. I'll dress up on Christmas and Easter. In return, you're going to make sure my kids are saved, I'm employed, I stay relatively healthy, and I live with some measure of daily comfort. Deal? Let's make that deal. Be my transactional Jesus. And the disciples are coming off a great day of serving. They have given their life to Jesus. All day they've been serving, right? Jesus was on fire as a teacher. The crowds were engaged. This was a day for the ages. We're still reading about it today. Jesus is tired. The disciples are tired. There's a recent TV show about the life of Christ, which portrays the role of the disciples really well. Like, these were his executive team, right? The disciples were getting the crowds ready, venues ready. They were doing a lot of the legwork. Christ's closest followers are Jesus' executive team to get these venues ready. They're working hard. Everyone on these boats going across the Sea of Galilee with Jesus, this is Team Jesus, okay? These are Jesus' inner team. These are his followers. These are the ones who make these events happen. And at the end of this amazing day of ministry, what's their reward? Near death by shipwreck on the open sea. That's not the deal. That's the deal. Paul's missionary life was filled with suffering. We know that. He wrote about it all the time. Paul suffered in the name of Christ, this most productive apostle that Jesus ever had, to the point that Paul said, I despair of life. Paul got to the point where he said, I despair of living. Why? Listen to some of Paul's pain, all in the cause of Christ, all as a missionary for Jesus. Paul says, quote, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. 24 hours floating in the sea, probably holding on to some wreckage, like a piece of lumber that floated. For 24 hours just floating in the sea, like, really, Lord? Really? Is this the deal? On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he recounts all of those challenges. In his suffering, Paul discovered 3 things. Number 1, God was sovereign over all of it. God was sovereign over all of it. And number 2, it was intended to make him depend on Christ even more. And number 3, by Paul's testimonies of deliverance, Christ will magnify himself in the world. That's exactly what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. He says, why am I always getting in these situations and then only God can deliver me? It's so that I can write you and tell you that your prayers are bearing fruit. Listen to these stories. Let's magnify God together. That's the plan. That's how God is working through Paul's life. So Mark 4 and Psalm 107 make this same point. God makes much of God in storms. God makes much of God in storms. Because in those storms, God aims to redeem a people who will magnify himself in the world. It's amazing. This dynamic holds true for disciples, for apostles, for pastors, for ordinary Christians. It's true for God-fearing businessmen on a boat on Monday morning. Off to work they go, sleepwalking through TSA, putting in the miles, doing the business, and then one day God magnifies himself in a violent fit of turbulence. Why? Because Satan took control of the ocean? No. Because God's angry with his businessmen? No. Because God's angry with the disciples? No. Because God loves these men. He loves them enough to send a storm so that God's businessmen, jostled for a moment from all their daily cares, from all the vanity of the distractions in their lives, get reminded of how frail life is and get thrown back onto God and are delivered by God so that what? So that they will declare the redeeming mercy of God to the people. See how that works? Psalm 107, Mark 4, they're doing the same thing. God makes much of God in the storm so that we will magnify him in the redemption. As Christ told Paul, my power is made perfect in your weakness. The real Jesus is more concerned with magnifying his own worth and his own power through us than in making our life comfortable for us. That's the real Jesus. And this is our remaining battle with unbelief. It's the battle the disciples faced on the boat. They knew Christ loved him. Christ loves us, right? He has to love us. He's shown us love. But is he cruel to us too? He's not waking up. Like, he should be awake. Does he love us or is he cruel? So is Jesus cruel to snooze while his friends drowned? Was Jesus cruel to lead his disciples right into the middle of a stormy sea? And if God sends you into a storm so strong that you come to the end of yourself and you find that you can do nothing else but throw yourself back onto God, is that cruel, or is that to be loved by God? That's the challenge of belief that the disciples faced in the boat, and that's the challenge of unbelief that we all face. We all still face this. God is full of love to us. That is why he purges us of our vanities and all the fake Jesuses, all for our final good and for his greater glory in the end. We must be wise to see this, because anyone will follow a fake Jesus that promises to make your life easier. That's a fake. The true Jesus is going to magnify himself in you as his wind and his waves throw you onto him. As Charles Spurgeon testified of his own suffering, one of the most profound quotes you'll ever read outside the Bible, quote, "I have learned to kiss the wave that strikes me against the rock of ages." I have learned to kiss the wave that strikes me against the rock of ages. See how that can be love? 19th century Scottish missionary Alexander Duff made it his aim to bring education to the people of India. He had a heart for the Indian people, and he eventually did. He eventually founded the University of Calcutta, still operating today. 165 years later, there's 19,000 students at the University of Calcutta, all owing to this missionary, Alexander Duff. It was not an easy road. In 1829, Duff packed all of his belongings and 800 books, the start of a university library, into a cargo ship. He was young, he was ambitious, and he was newly married. And he and his new bride left London for Calcutta on October 14th, 1829, in the late fall. About halfway through their stormy journey around Africa, as they approached Cape Town at night, the winds picked up, and the ship's captain, seeking to avoid a sandbar on one side, instead ran full speed into a reef of rocks on the other. Bottomed out on the rocks, the waves would eventually crack the ship in half, and in the frantic darkness and what could only be seen as God's deliverance, all 22 passengers made it safely on smaller boats to a deserted island nearby. But all of Duff's books were lost. His entire university library that he wanted to take to Calcutta, totally washed away. The next morning at first light, as pieces of wood from the broken ship washed ashore, one of the crew members noticed that a book had washed up on the beach. Just one book. He picked it up, opened the cover, and saw Duff's name on the inside. It was Duff's personal Bible. It's the only book that washed up. When he handed it to Duff, everyone stood amazed, and Duff called the 21 other survivors together, and he knelt down, he laid his saltwater-soaked Bible on the white sand, on his knees, opened to Psalm 107, and read slowly. It's a psalm about God's love and redemptive grace to those in the sea. As Duff read, he put special emphasis on the psalm's very last verse, verse 43. Whoever is wise, let him attend to these things. Let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord. Father, make us wise. This is so counterintuitive, so counterintuitive. Make us wise to see your sovereign love, not just your love in the stillness, but your love in the storms when it seems like you're sleeping. You are never, ever indifferent to us. So teach us this impossible lesson that we can never, ever learn in the flesh, to kiss the wave that strikes us against the rock of ages. As you deem fit, prune from us our vanities until we have nothing left but to cling to the one true living Jesus. And in that, magnify yourself in and by us to the world. It is truly awesome to behold Jesus, the real Jesus, fully God, maker of creation, bender of creation, and yet fully a man who sympathizes with us in our weakness. To you, this true Jesus, we worship now in bread and cup, in your sovereign and precious and loving and compassionate name, we pray. Amen.